All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into one of the most powerful and, honestly, most enduring strategies in all of warfare, the naval blockade.
So let's kick things off with a big question, one that military thinkers have wrestled with for, well, centuries. How do you beat an enemy without ever fighting a single battle? It's not always about the dramatic clash of armies or fleets. Sometimes the most crushing victory is the one you win slowly, with patience, and a whole lot of pressure.
And the answer, well, it lies in this really powerful idea called strategic denial. Basically, the goal is to make it literally impossible for your enemy to even wage war by cutting them off from everything they need to survive. And when you're talking about nations with a coastline, the most famous and yet devastating tool for this is, you guessed it, the naval blockade.
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to rewind, all the way back to the ancient world. Back then, a blockade wasn't some complex economic chess game. Nope, it was simple, it was brutal, and it was basically just a part of siege warfare, but on the water.
And the thinking behind it was just incredibly straightforward. Look, if a city's lifeblood is the sea, for food, for trade, for bringing in more soldiers, then you control the city by controlling the sea. You basically become a giant wall on the water and just squeeze. And you want a perfect example? Look no further than Alexander the Great's siege of Tyre. This thing was an absolute masterclass. He couldn't attack the island city from land, right? So what does he do? He builds a massive bridge to it, and at the exact same time, he builds a navy to completely seal it off from the sea. It was this brilliant, perfect pincer movement of raw engineering and naval might. All right, let's jump forward in time. We're now in the age of sail, and this is where new tech completely transforms the blockade. It's not just a tactic for taking a single city anymore. Oh no, it's now becoming a massive instrument of grand strategy, something you use against entire nations. Now, as blockades get more common, they also get way more controversial. So, countries actually try to lay down some ground rules. For a blockade to be considered legal, it had to meet a few conditions. It couldn't just be some threat you write on paper. No, it had to be effective. You needed the ships to back it up. It had to be declared. You had to tell everyone you were doing it. And it had to be impartial. You had to apply it to everybody, no exceptions. And this is where things get really interesting, because you have this fundamental clash of ideas. On one side, you've got the neutral nations saying, hey, freedom of the seas, we should be able to trade with anyone we want. But on the other side, the nations at war are saying, hold on, we have the right to stop any trade that helps our enemy. And this debate, this tension, it basically defined the entire era, both legally and economically. So the big takeaway here is that the whole focus shifted. The game wasn't just about starving out a single city anymore. It was about pure economic strangulation on a national scale. Just think about the British blockade of Napoleonic France. The whole point was to cut off every single economic artery, imports, exports, everything, and just cripple the French war machine from the inside.
And then the Industrial Revolution hits, and everything changes. You've got steam power, you've got ironclad ships, you've got way deadlier weapons. And the blockade? It gets scaled up once again, this time into a truly brutal instrument of total war.
The strategy wasn't just about the economy now. It was about causing a total collapse of society itself. The goal was to grind an entire empire's industrial machine to a complete stop, and, just as importantly, to break the will of its people to even keep fighting. You can see this terrifying new scale in action during the American Civil War. The Union's Anaconda Plan was literally designed to just squeeze the life out of the Confederacy. And this concept really reached its peak, its most terrible peak in the World Wars. We're talking about blockades that caused unbelievable suffering for civilians and directly, brutally, crippled entire war efforts. And the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II, man, that was the ultimate expression of this. It wasn't one battle. It was a brutal, years-long life-or-death struggle fought for one reason and one reason only, to control the supply lines between North America and Britain. And this whole struggle just became this deadly, high-tech game of cat and mouse. The Germans would use their U-boat wolf packs to hunt down supply ships. So the Allies create the convoy system for protection. Then sonar gets better at finding the subs. Then long-range planes come in to provide air cover and hunt them from above. It was just this constant back and forth, with each side desperately developing new tech just to get the slightest advantage. Okay, so that brings us pretty much up to the modern era. And here, the dawn of the nuclear age is about to change the entire game. Completely. See, after World War II, the idea of a full-blown traditional blockade against a major nuclear power like the Soviet Union or the United States, it just became unthinkable. Why? Because the risk that a direct confrontation like that could escalate into all-out nuclear war was just way, way too high. Nobody was willing to take that chance.
Think about it. The classic blockade was a really blunt instrument, right? It was just a massive wall of ships sealing off an entire coastline. It was big, it was obvious, and it was an undeniable act of war.
So the whole concept had to evolve. It had to get smarter, more precise, more targeted. And what emerged was the Maritime Interdiction Operation, or MIO for short. And this wasn't a giant wall anymore. It was a surgeon's scalpel.
So instead of trying to strangle an entire nation, these modern MIOs act more like a surgical clamp. They're used for very specific things: enforcing UN sanctions, going after pirates off the Horn of Africa, stopping ships carrying illegal weapons, or preventing terrorists from using the seas to move around.
And the tech behind these operations is just incredible. We're talking satellites, we're talking drones giving you eyes in the sky 24/7. All of it is backed up by global intelligence sharing and elite special forces teams who can board a ship anywhere on the planet. It's a whole new ballgame. So we've just gone on this massive journey, right? All the way from ancient sieges to modern special ops. What's the big takeaway here? What's the bottom line after all this time? Well, it's this, the fundamental idea, that principle of strategic denial, it's never changed. But how we apply it has transformed radically over the centuries. It went from a physical wall of ships to a powerful economic weapon, to a terrifying tool of total war, and now, finally, to the precise surgical instrument it is today. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what era you're in. The power to control the seas, to control those vital maritime highways, and maybe more importantly, to deny that control to your enemies, that remains an absolutely critical piece of global power. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. We've watched the blockade evolve from wooden ships to U-boats to satellites. So, in our age of cyber warfare and controlling assets in space, what's the next frontier? How is this ancient strategy of denial going to adapt for the future?